Hey YouTube, we're making brioche buns today. So roll your sleeves up and get ready to knead some dough. So here we go. So the ingredients we'll need for this bun recipe will be 1 tablespoon of pink Himalayan salt, 8 grams or 1 packet of active dry yeast, 52 grams or 1/4 of a cup of brown sugar, or you can also use regular sugar, 62 milliliters or half a stick of unsalted butter that's been melted, 119 milliliters or half a cup of lukewarm water around 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit, 237 milliliters or 1 cup of unsweetened, unflavored almond milk. You can also use regular milk, and we also want that at 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit, 600 grams or 4 cups of all-purpose flour, and 2 eggs at room temperature. So we'll start off by blooming our yeast in the wet ingredients. I'm going to start with the almond milk at a nice lukewarm temperature. Next, I'm going to add the melted butter, lukewarm water, sugar, yeast, and give it a gentle stir to incorporate everything. Most people say, "Let the bloom yeast for about 5 minutes, mon." That's my Jamaican accent, I know it's horrible. But I like to give it a few extra minutes, which means I prefer to bloom for about 8 minutes or so. Your yeast mixture should look something like this. Nice, bubbly, foamy, activated yeast. This will let you know your yeast is alive and doing well. While our yeast is getting nice and cozy with the sugar and butter mix and blooming into perfection, we'll mix our dry ingredients. Here I put the 1 tablespoon of salt in the flour and give it a good mix with my hands. After that, I make a nice cozy hole in the middle of the bowl to make room for the wet ingredients. Before we mix the dry and wet ingredients, we are going to whisk up an egg and add it to the wet ingredients mixture and give it a stir. Now we can add the yeast mixture into our flour. I start mixing with a spoon at first until the dough becomes flaky, and then switch to using my hands to incorporate the dough further. Before going too far with it, we'll transfer the dough on a lightly floured working surface. Here we are going to knead the dough for at least 10 minutes to make sure it gets properly incorporated. I find it important not to add too much flour for the kneading. I'm only putting flour on my hands to prevent it from sticking during the kneading process. I floured my hands about 7 times during this step. Once we have a nice smooth dough ball that's well incorporated, we'll set it aside to rest and to let it rise. To do so, we'll get a clean bowl, oil it up. I use cheap olive oil, and oil up the top of the dough ball as well. Gently place the lubed up dough ball in the bowl and cover it with saran wrap. I also put a towel underneath the bowl to prevent the bowl from getting too cold from the marble countertop, as well as a towel on top to make sure no one gets to peek in the bowl and disturb the dough ball. I let the dough sit for 2 hours. If you're in a hurry, you can let it sit for an hour, but I prefer a longer raising process. Once you've waited long enough, get a scale ready if you want your buns to be uniform in size. Flip your dough ball onto the work surface once again, punch it to deflate it, and give it a few minute knead and make it into a nice taut dough ball again. I split up the dough ball into 4 even pieces. Then I took each one of those pieces, split them again, and started weighing out the dough into 95-gram dough balls. Next, I prepare my baking tray by lining it with parchment paper and spraying it with no-stick cooking spray. I space the dough balls out as evenly as possible, giving them as much room as possible. Next, we'll cover them with a wet kitchen towel for 30 minutes. After that, we preheat the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius. While the oven preheats, we'll let the dough balls rest for the duration of the preheat. Once the oven is at temperature, we uncover the dough and whisk up the last egg. We apply the egg wash generously over all our buns. Try to cover them as well as possible. Into the oven they go for 25 to 30 minutes. I suggest putting them for 25 minutes at first and then keep checking depending on how light or dark you like your buns. Make sure to let them cool off before digging into them. Eat them fast as possible, because if you don't, someone else will. Trust me, they're that good.